That's fine. Now for the story of the ghost who forgot Halloween. Wilbur Kennesaw Smith was a ghost. He was named Wilbur after his great-grandfather, a very famous old ghost, who unfortunately was floating through the darkness one night when he got his sheet caught in a windmill, and that was the end of him. He was named Kennesaw after his uncle, who, sad to say, died of ghostly pneumonia while haunting an explorer at the North Pole. And he was named Smith because that was his father's name. Now, Wilbur, for the most part, was a happy, easygoing little ghost. His father and mother loved him dearly and were certain he'd grow up to be a very successful apparition. But Wilbur had one bad fault. He was always falling asleep.
I'm so tired. I'm always so tired.
Yes, Wilbur was always tired. He was tired at school and he was tired at play, and it worried his father and mother very much. Mother Ghost thought it was because he was a growing ghost, and that as he grew older, he wouldn't be tired anymore. But Wilbur seemed to grow more tired every day. Now, Wilbur went to school just like all boys and girls do, except that being a ghost, he went to school at night. And instead of learning reading and writing, he learned moaning and groaning. And instead of addition and subtraction, he learned appearing and disappearing. And lots of other things, too. Sheet flapping and chain rattling and plain and fancy haunting and floating on air and everything a ghost should know to be a really good ghost. But Wilbur's trouble was that he didn't pay attention in school. And the reason he didn't pay attention was that he was always sleepy. His teacher's name was Miss Spook, and sometimes she became very angry with him. One night in the classroom...
And now, class, I'm going to test you in moaning and groaning. Wilbur Kennesaw Smith. Wilbur Kennesaw Smith. Wilbur, don't you hear me? Up.
Oh, yes, Miss Spook.
This is your final test in moaning and groaning, Wilbur. Go ahead. Moan for me. That, Wilbur, is a yawn, not a moan. Now moan. Oh, good heavens. Is that what you call a moan? Why, I wouldn't even frighten a caterpillar, let alone a human being. Now listen to me. This is a moan. There, you see? Now you try it, Wilbur. I said you try it. Wilbur, you're snoring. You're fast asleep.
Yes, Wilbur was fast asleep, floating over his desk. Well, Miss Spook didn't know what to do with Wilbur. She spoke to the principal of the school, Mr. Rattlebones, and he called Wilbur in for a little talk.
What seems to be the trouble, Wilbur?
Trouble? There isn't any trouble.
Don't you get enough sleep in the daytime? Is that why you can't stay awake at night like every other ghost?
I sleep all day, but I'm still tired.
Well, Miss Spook tells me she can't possibly promote you unless you do better in class. And here it is, only 2 nights before Halloween. Promotion night. You don't want to be left back, do you?
No, Mr. Rattlebone.
You want want to go out into the world and haunt people, don't you?
Yes, Mr. Rattlebone.
Well, you certainly don't seem to be trying very hard. You know, Wilbur, I was your father's teacher when he went to this school. Oh, he was a wonderful pupil. I remember when he took his final test in appearing and disappearing. Oh, I remember that very well. Your father, Wilbur, disappeared, and he didn't come back for 2 weeks. 2 whole weeks. That's something.
Was he tired, too?
No, not at all. Why, when he was young, he could moan and groan for days without stopping.
I wish I was like my father.
Well, there's no reason why you can't be, Wilbur. I'm going to have a talk with your teacher, Miss Spook, and maybe I can get her to agree that if you pass your haunting test on Halloween, she'll promote you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Rattlebone.
But remember, Wilbur, you must pass the haunting test. No pupil in this school can be promoted unless he can haunt. Because if a ghost can't haunt, he might just as well be a human being.
Wilbur was all excited when he got home from school that night. He told his mother and father about the haunting test on Halloween and how, if he passed, he'd be promoted. They were so happy and so proud, Wilbur's father promised to let him use his oldest and rustiest set of chains to clank. And Wilbur's mother said she'd make him a brand new sheet out of ghostly white material. And Wilbur's old Uncle Henry, who'd given up haunting because the night air was bad for his rheumatism, offered to lend Wilbur 2 of his dried-up bones.
Oh, I never knew nothing that could scare the living daylight out of them human beings. Wilbur, the rattling of the dry bones.
And so Wilbur was all equipped to pass his Halloween haunting test. It was quite dark. A perfect night for haunting. Wilbur's mother and father floated down as far as the hollow with him. Then they disappeared, and Wilbur was left all alone. He drifted through the valley until he came to the tiny graveyard he was supposed to haunt. There he scurried around among the gravestones and markers, groaning and moaning, and clanking his chain, and flapping his sheet, and rattling his old Uncle Henry's bones. Why, haunting wasn't hard at all. There was nothing to it. In fact, it was great fun. Wilbur floated over the graveyard, wheeling and dipping, making believe he was a ghostly airplane. Suddenly, he stopped short in midair. 2 huge green eyes were staring at him out of the darkness. The next moment, he heard a sound that sent shivers up his spine. Again, he heard the strange, frightening sound. Wilbur turned pale as a human, and he would have floated out of that graveyard as fast as he could if his father's rusty old chain hadn't suddenly caught on a headstone. And it was lucky for Wilbur that it did, because the next moment the huge green eyes blinked, and a weird voice came out of the darkness.
Don't be afraid of me, little ghost. I'm just an old doll. On Halloween, I fight the silly people, too.
And laughing deep down in his feathers, the old hoot owl flew off the limb of the tree on which he'd been sitting and vanished. Poor Wilbur, trembling like a leaf, loosened the rusty old chain, picked up his Uncle Henry's bones, he'd dropped them in his fright, and with a deep sigh settled himself on top of a large, flat gravestone and draped his sheet around him. He'd suddenly become very tired. He looked up at the sky. Now the stars were winking and blinking, and there was a quarter moon that looked like a silver watermelon rind. All was quiet and peaceful. So quiet and peaceful, in fact, that Wilbur completely forgot it was Halloween, that he was supposed to be taking his final examination. Oh, my, is that Wilbur yawning? Yes, it is Wilbur. And he's falling asleep. Wilbur's fast asleep, almost 2 hours before midnight, with most of his haunting left undone. What will happen now? Well, in a little while, the old hoot owl returned to his perch on the limb of the tree. He looked about for Wilbur and discovered him asleep on the gravestone. Now, he was a wise old owl, as owls usually are, and he knew that the last thing a ghost should do is fall asleep on Halloween. So he hooted and hooted until he was almost blue in the beak. But Wilbur didn't wake up. In fact, Wilbur didn't wake up for a long time. Not until a rooster on a nearby farm started to crow. Then he sat up with a jerk. He blinked 3 times. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, and dawn was beginning to light the sky in the east. And there, seated on the iron picket fence surrounding the tiny graveyard, were his mother, his father, all the other ghosts and goblins, and, worst of all, Miss Spook, his teacher. Wilbur tried hard to hold back his tears. He hadn't meant to forget Halloween. He hadn't meant to fall asleep. He trembled as his teacher got off the picket fence and floated over to him.
Well, Wilbur, what have you to say for yourself?
I'm sorry, Miss Spook.
Is that all?
I didn't mean to fall asleep, but I was so tired.
That seems to be your trouble, Wilbur. You're always so tired. We've got to teach you a lesson. Any ghost who forgets Halloween and falls asleep in the middle of haunting must be taught a lesson. Let me have your sheet.
My sheet?
Yes, your sheet. Thank you.
I'm cold just sitting here in my bones.
That's too bad. You'll just have to get used to it. From now on, you're not going to be allowed to wear a sheet. You'll have to walk around in your bones until you prove to me that you have learned how to haunt without falling asleep. And until that time, you will not be promoted.
And so, boys and girls, and grown-ups, too, this coming Halloween, if you should happen to see a sleepy little ghost walking around in his bare bones, remember that it's Wilbur. Wilbur Kennesaw Smith. He's looking for someone to haunt so that he can be promoted and get his sheet back. So if you do meet Wilbur, be kind to him and let him haunt you, won't you? And in case he should yawn right in the middle of the haunting, tickle him in the ribs to keep him awake, so that this Halloween, Wilbur can be promoted.
Please, let me haunt you.
And that's the story of the ghost who forgot Halloween.
That's not the kind of ghost story I meant.
Oh, didn't you like